Hello everyone, Gerard Scarpaci here for number 17 in our special series with our friends from Pivot Point. You can see I've got my beautiful Pivot Point girl Diane working with me today, and we'll talk a little bit about Diane and why I chose her. Today's lesson is going to be about razor cutting. You all hopefully have seen me cut before with a razor. It's something I'm very, very passionate about. I was thinking about our last HB Live for Pivot Point, which was featuring Jay Mahmood, our really good friend who's a beautiful scissor cutter. And he did a beautiful kind of graduated shape using the scissor last time. And I thought it would be nice to kind of switch it up and show how something like that can be interpreted with the razor. So you can see today I've chosen to use a more traditional feather styling razor as opposed to the what I normally use, which is a folding blade. And I think just because so many of you guys are more comfortable with this, it's a great lesson. I mean, obviously what I normally like is a folding razor, but what I tell everyone is really the lessons are exactly the same because the shaft and the way that the blade moves is exactly the same. It's just about balance and comfort. So today I'm going to work with the more kind of widely known tool. What I'm doing here is starting off in the front and cutting in the beginning of the angle. So this is going to be kind of a graduation in reverse. I'm going to put in this line here. I'm going to slowly elevate it. And I'm going to be working with a lot of different section angles to make it happen. So I started off around the front hairline. My first section was curved like the hairline so that I had an even amount or even distribution of weight. Now as I move back, I'm slowly getting more vertical, and I'll end up totally vertical by about close to the back of the ear, and then I will change my sections completely to work up the back. Some of you may be familiar with a haircut called an inside out, which was kind of an advanced creative graduation from the 90s. And this is something that's been, that's kind of when I started my career, and it's something that's always been kind of a staple of my work. So in terms of the way that I'm working with the razor here, I'm working on a bias, or what we call kind of a diagonal blade, at least what I call a diagonal blade. And what I find that does is it creates a little bit more graduation or taper on my lines. My first section I cut with the edge of the blade to get a good established outline. Now as I work internally, I'm cutting more bias. So blade diagonal, little bit of scrape cut. So that scraping helps put a little graduation on the surface of the line. On this very, very front piece, I'll go back to what we call edge blade, edge cutting, because I want this to be as solid as possible. You'll also notice that I'm rotating my fingertips towards the chin or towards the face. It makes it easier to razor cut, and it also helps keep it lower elevation at the front. So Kelly is behind the camera today. Say hi, Kelly.
Hi, everyone.
And if you have any questions or comments, she'll be giving you guys shout outs and sharing your questions with me.
All right, well, we've got Michael, of course, here supporting you. Violetta, Jahari Coop. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Chantel. Michael remembers the episode with Jay, and he said it's dope.
Yeah, so I'm not cutting it. Jay cut from the back to the front. But he cut like this beautiful little compact graduated shape. So inspiring for those of you that watched it. If you didn't watch it, you guys can go back at any time to HB Live number 16 on our Facebook page. You just go to Hairbrained's page on Facebook and you click on the videos. And when you click on the videos, you will be able to then access everything that's there.
Gina was wondering if you're using the section pattern from the inside out.
Yeah, it's something over the years that has evolved, so I can't say that it's exactly the same as the video, but just like a lot of techniques, and I think that's what's great about techniques and sharing and learning is that we evolve. Yes, it started from the front. Yes, I put the baseline in. My sectioning, it's been a while since I watched the actual video, the original Inside Out video. But my sectioning over the years has become parallel to the hairline, slightly more and more vertical for about 4 or 5 sections until I reach this point, continually elevating. In this case, since I'm using the razor, I don't need to elevate quite so much because the angle of the blade creates the graduation, and then I will go into the back. So I'm following a lot of the steps, but of course putting my own spin on it, and that's what I recommend all students do.
Can you show us a little bit more about what you mean by elevating and how much you're elevating?
Yeah, I'm just really coming off the plane of the head right here. So I'm not elevating too much. My first section was really close to the face, natural fall. The subsequent sections have been like right off the plane of the head. I'm using the comb to find the natural plane or the natural curve of the head.
And then I noticed that your mannequin is also tilted. Does that have to do with
It creates more comfort and access and control for me, and it would allow me more flexibility around her. So, and also, you know, in general, my rule of head position is when I'm building weight, I tend to move the head away from me, right? This way I can keep the weight built up. When I'm removing weight, I keep the head up or bring it towards me. It makes it easier to flatten it out. So here I'm definitely building weight. I'm trying to build a nice graduated baseline, as you can see, hopefully, through the camera here. You can see there's a bit of graduation and a nice line following the line of the chin. So it took about 3 or 4 sections to complete that here on Diane. Now I'm going to change up my pattern and where I'm working. I'm going to come into the back of the head. So with the universal tripod here from Pivot Point, what's great is I can just swivel it around right here without having to pick up the whole thing, and then gently tilt it and lock it in. As I mentioned earlier, I've chosen to work with Diane today because first off, I really love blonde mannequins for demonstration on video and stuff. I think that you know, the feedback I've gotten is it's easier to follow. Sometimes the darker ones, although they're incredible mannequins and great for classes, sometimes a lighter one reads a little bit better on video, so let me know how that's working, and then I try to wear some contrasting colors. So after doing 300 or so of these videos, I think we've learned a few things. Okay, so you can see I'm starting a completely new section in the back. I found that, you know, sometimes when I curve all the way around, there's too much of a gap. So I'm starting a new curve section in the base of the occipital and the base of the nape here. And I'm going to look at this visually. And now let's get back to think about what type of blade rotation we want to work with. Since I'm creating my baseline, and I'm going to imagine that it's going to curve with the hairline and dip down a little bit naturally in the back. So my fingers are going to follow this curve. I'm going to come in with the heel on the edge. So this is the comfort factor for me. The heel, since I'm cutting from here, or I'm cutting towards the left, and just thinking about that curving and coming through into the back.
And for those of us who maybe not know, what is the heel of the blade you're referencing?
So, you know, when we talk about razors, whether they be folding razor or this type of razor, the tip is the front third, the heel is the back third, and then the body or the flat, to me, is kind of like the whole blade. Most of the time, I don't do a ton of cutting with the flat or the body of the blade unless I'm cutting very short textured hair.
What are some tips when you're taking the hairline quite short with your razor?
Well, I think generally whether it's scissor or razor, we should spend some time looking at the hairline, seeing which directions that it grows in. Most hairlines need some undercutting or some manicuring where you come beneath. And like even in this case, if I said, oh, that's a strong growth direction, this would be one of the times when I'd use the razor flatter, especially if I'm cutting it in shorter, to try to take out the strength of the calic or the growth direction so the hair that falls over it won't be disturbed as much. Generally, for me, you're either going to cut it longer than the hairline, or you're going to cut it a little bit shorter than the hairline, or you're going to undercut it. So little things to think about there. Undercutting is probably the one I do the most. And I mean, by undercutting, it's very subtle, like what I just did. I just manicure a few pieces of hair. Now the blade is getting more on a diagonal or more bias, so I can start to create some graduation here. And looking at it in reference to the front and knowing as I go on, these are going to begin to curve and connect. Again, sectioning. I think, you know, one of the misconceptions, at least for me, again, everybody works differently, but for me, I like to take fine sections. To me, it's a misconception that since you're razor cutting, you should take thick sections and you can just kind of go for it. You can see this is very controlled and technical. The only reason I choose the razor over the scissor is to change the texture at the ends of the hair.
Now, we can't really get too good of a shot here, but how far back is this section going? How far back are you cutting?
Let me move the head and then you can see exactly. I'm just crossing the center here.
Crossing this.
So if I come around here, I'm curving and just crossing the center. All my sections are going to be parallel. This is just a basic outline. Very, very simple. So my sections are all just parallel, rounded sections, almost kind of like halo-ish. Slight elevation off the plane of the head, and then letting the razor really create the graduation.
I just want to jump in here, and Frank Mussolino's with us. He's saying Happy New Year to
What's
all
up,
of
Frank?
us.
Happy New Year to you.
Sheila likes the blonde hair also, shows the cut more than any of the other colors.
So you can see here now, I've reached up to a point where I'm going to start to think really, visually I've been thinking about the outline in the front. Now I'm going to think about it technically as well. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to see where that outline was. I'm going to come right back to where I was cutting. Going to leave a little bit of the connection out for just a moment.
1 second.
Coming in on a bias blade to get some graduation. Crossing over the center here, just a little bit.
Can you give us a refresher on what you mean by bias, cutting on the bias?
Yeah, so blade has to do with what I call blade rotation. When I've got a section of hair in my hand, if the blade is T to the fingers or perpendicular to the fingers, I call that edge cutting. That'll cut in a chunky way, but in a pretty clean, defined way. It's a great way to create outlines. When I go on a diagonal to my fingers, I call that bias cutting. It creates more taper and graduation on the section. And when I'm flat, I call that flat cutting, and that's when you really want to shred hair. You really want to be careful with that. That's one of the times where you can get into trouble with the razor if you're a little too aggressive. Coming back to the edge here where I do the connection, so I can keep a little bit more weight, because there's no hair underneath here. It's kind of like the first section of the outline. So being really gentle in that connection between the back and the front, and starting to see this graduation. A little bit of freehand on the edge. Work my way back in. So I've made that connection now. Another curved section. So simple, I call this advanced razor cutting. To me, advanced is the theory of understanding what you're doing. I don't think a haircut needs to be complicated or visually very avant-garde to be advanced. It's your knowledge of what you're doing.
Carla was wondering if Trevor Sorby has inspired you using the razor blade.
Oh, of course. I think Trevor Sorby has inspired every passionate hairdresser. I can't say that I've ever really taken a class or learned from him, although when I was a very, very young hairdresser, I saw some of his earliest videos in the late 80s, early 90s. So absolutely inspired by everything that Trevor Sorby is and everything that he's done, but I can't say that I've ever had the pleasure of learning razor cutting from him.
Just want to take a moment and welcome our international members from Hong Kong and Morocco, the UK, everyone out there, Jersey, of course. Welcome, everybody. Nick Servos.
Great to have everyone watching with us. So again, if you're just joining us, we're here for HB Live number 17. This is part of our Pivot Point series, so it's the Professionals Who Practice series. And the last one that we did featured Jay Mahmood, who, if you haven't learned from him, definitely go back and check out that video, amongst others that he's done for us. He did a beautiful scissor graduation, and it just inspired me to want to, come back in and show a little bit of razor graduation, and doing it in a way that I really love to do it, from the front to the back. Elevating off the plane of the head, bias blade, a little bit more open of a stroke. You can start to see the way that graduation kind of bevels the shape into the head.
Frank Mussolino's noticing you're in a jacket this afternoon.
Thanks, Frank.
Complimenting your style.
It's cold here in New York, and I put the air conditioner on in the studio here. I usually cut in a t-shirt, but even Kelly said, "You can keep a jacket on for this?" And I said, "Yeah, I gotta give it a shot." Okay, so you can see where I've stopped, right above the occipital bone. So I've got from the occipital bone here to the top of the head on Diane uncut. And I'm going to leave that uncut for the moment because I want to go to the opposite side. I'm going to clip this away and clean it up. It's kind of going to make like half of a circle at the back.
What's your reasoning for stopping here and moving on? I'm going to
change the section angle here. So I could continue on, but this would be very, very heavy. But with this technique, after I get the outline in on the other side, I'm going to come through here vertically and I'm going to cut the graduation and extend it at a higher elevation, which is the essence of, the technique I'm kind of paying homage to here, the inside out. It was about kind of putting in an outline shape and then extending that outline shape through the inside. So you can see where I've stopped. If you're just joining us, the good news is you're going to get to see exactly how I did this on the opposite side. So let's reposition a little bit here.
And as you do that, just popping in, Rainbow Thorpe has the comment of the episode so far.
Oh yeah, what's that?
He's a real pro, such admiration for his skills and passion for our profession.
You're talking about me?
They're talking about you.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rainbow.
I've been a hairdresser now since 1990, so I guess technically that's 29 years or close to 30, depending on how you look at the calendar. And I always like to say I'm the luckiest hairdresser in the world. I get to work with these incredible brands like Pivot Point, who, sent us all these great mannequins saying, hey, we love what you guys are doing with education. We'd love to, if you want to use our mannequins in your education, please do. So, as well as all the other great brands, and not to mention all the incredible hairdressers behind those brands or even independently. So, luckiest hairdresser in the world right here. All right, so good thing to do here when you're moving from side to side is to resection your first side. If you can, if you've got the time and the presence of mind, come back across, look at it. The line is really sitting right at the line of the jaw here. Now with razor cutting, that can be a little bit trickier because you're cutting above your fingers. So you do have to give yourself room to play.
Maha would like to discuss elevation for this haircut.
Okay, well this is a perfect time to do it because I'm starting it all over right now.
She also mentions for thin hair for this haircut.
I mean, in general, the lower you elevate, the more weight you keep in the hair. So the thinner the hair, the less you elevate, the thicker the hair, the more you can elevate. But when you're razor cutting, that also, you want to think about the blade itself. So the blade creates a lot of the graduation here. I don't need to elevate as much. So I just did edge cutting at a very low elevation. I'm going to do that again. That would keep as much density as I could in the hair. If you felt the hair was still too fine, then you could cut with a scissor. But you can see that's not making a lot of unnecessarily shred or taper on the hair. So you've got a lot of flexibility with the razor once you get that advanced control of it. I feel like I can do a lot of things similar to the scissor, or I can do things that are very, very different to the scissor with the razor. But I also do love the scissor. So coming in to check my balance, which is a very important part of this, feeling right below the chin, feeling the length here, over-directing the longer or heavier side back, and feeling it next to the face. And I think that feels pretty good. It feels pretty balanced. So I either got lucky or the gods are with me on this first cut here.
Robin did us a solid and headed over to Pivot Point and gave it a like, so we appreciate that very much.
Yeah, Pivot Point, there's so many great companies in our industry, but without a doubt, one of them is Pivot Point, with over 50 plus years of supporting education, founded by a hairdresser, Leo Passage. And if I can talk a minute about the products that they make, on top of being great for educators, they're ethical in their business practices, which is very important to me. These mannequins, they're the highest quality, and they're a little bit more expensive than the cheaper stuff out there. And one of the reasons being that all of the labor is ethically sourced, all of the workers are paid a fair living wage, all the people that basically donate the hair, or they don't donate it, they're paid for it. So, this is really important. The companies that we work with and that you choose to work with, they affect the world.
So Teresa was wondering about this haircut and curly hair.
It's a beautiful haircut for curly hair, one of my favorites. The mannequin has some wave to it, and I'll just let it dry naturally. But whenever you're working kind of in a more horizontal cutting fashion, a lot of times, it can be great for curly hair, especially with the razor, because you can take out weight yet maintain enough weight at the same time. So here you can see the blade is more diagonal, so getting more graduation on the line, or what I call bias blade. And I will change that subtly for the last cut here because we want to keep this front corner as sharp as we can. So I come back onto the edge. Probably about one more section before I move into the back. So this outline's cut in two phases for me. There's kind of from the back of the ear forward, and then from the hairline back. Actually, there's 3 phases because then I do the inside part too. So there's 2 phases to the outline and then a 3rd phase to the inside. A little bit of elevation, a little bit of rotation, bias blade.
Do you seem to be rotating, elevating a little bit more with each section?
Yeah, off the plane of the head. As the head curves, I call it plane elevation, or some people call it natural elevation or whatever. It's working slightly every time. It's really all about the comb, so that's why the comb is so important to me. I like a rigid comb. This is the Tough Comb 20, available at Hairbrained Pro. I like a carbon rigid comb because it really helps me to feel the head and feel the elevation. But again, combs are very personal, so you have to just, as long as you know what you like and why you like it. So right off the plane of the head, slight rotation, slight bias blade on a diagonal. Always cut air before hair to get that shape started. That means move the blade before it hits the hair and drop it down. And again, you should be able to see there's more graduation, less and less graduation onto the front. Okay, now, just like on the other side, for those of you who have been with me, I'm going to move into the back. If you're just joining me, I'm now going to move into the back and work my way up using pretty much horizontal sections with a slight curve, just mimicking the hairline. So I'm going to come right in here, curve across. If you were standing behind here, it would look like kind of like a smile from side to side. I'm going to keep that hair damp. I don't really like the hair to be overly dry when razor cutting, but I don't like it sopping wet either. Just damp to the touch. Okay, so now visually looking at this line and imagining it coming through here in a curve. Hold down, coming back to the edge of the razor. Edge cutting will give me a more distinct line or a distinct cut. And you can always tell by what you've cut off. If you look at this next to the comb, you can see compared to when I was creating more graduation or when I will be creating more graduation, it's about negative space or what you take off. So really looking at it. Connecting with the other side here and a slightly rounded line. Okay, now I'm going to continue to work up this side until I reach the stopping point that I accomplished on the first side. And then I'll go into the internal graduation. So sometimes people call this the external part, the outline of the graduation. And obviously it's a super important, especially when you're working with a bob shape, because you're trying to get some definition around the edges here. I'm going to stay on the edge a little bit more, so the edge of the blade, as I feel like I'm still establishing the outline, and I wouldn't want it to get too weak. If I need to do any detailing, I can pinch and come in with the blade and do some detailing.
Maha was mentioning that she uses pivot point mannequins for skills competition.
Yeah, pivot point, these are the ones that I'm using here, the Diane. This is like educational hair. It's meant to be cut, colored, styled. But there are some competition ones that are just amazing. It's probably hair you wouldn't want to cut. It's like buying an incredibly beautiful, expensive wig and then being able to style with it for hair competition. So, yeah, they've got it all covered.
Rainbow mentioned that she came in a little late and would like a little just recap, I guess, or what we're going for here today.
Sure. So we're creating a razor graduated bob. Inspired by many of the lessons that we've had here on our Hairbrained Facebook page, but I thought it was maybe time to show how some of those shapes can be established with razor cutting. We had a great lesson a few weeks ago from Jay Mahmood in Professionals Who Practice number 16. He showed us how using a beautiful Elise pivot point mannequin, a great technique for classic scissor graduation, and I was inspired by it. It was beautiful. I had so much fun working and learning from him that I thought this time around I would share a lesson about razor graduation, and that's what we're doing. So starting off by creating the outline, I start in the front, create a line that complements the jawline with some graduation, come into the back, create a rounded kind of graduated shape, and then after this is complete on both sides, I'll begin to work on internally kind of extending the graduation. Now the blade is on a diagonal, there's a little bit of elevation off the plane of the head, so I'm starting to create some graduation between elevation and also blade rotation. The two things together are what's starting to graduate that shape. Very careful here until I feel like I've got enough weight and a good strong connection. So coming back in, lowering the elevation, using the edge of the blade, and not cutting too much away in this connection area.
How does blade rotation affect elevation?
You don't need to elevate as much if you understand how to rotate the blade, right? Because I'll show you here if I take a piece of hair. When the blade is like a T to my fingers, the blade is T to the fingers. When it cuts fairly blunt. It's a razor cut from the side, but it's not creating a lot of graduation on the top of the hair. I find for me that when the blade is on a diagonal like this, you'll see it scrapes a lot before it cuts. And if that scraping is very controlled, it actually creates a graduated effect into the hair. I call it bias blade. Now, if I elevate a lot and also do bias blade, the hair's going to get really short. So for me, my razor technique is about not being aggressive. It's about the subtlety and the beauty and the efficiency of the razor.
Willie was wondering, do you prefer the straight-handled razor over the folding one? If so, why?
No, I do not. I typically, and I can show you right now, I'll switch to it for a moment. I typically work with a folding razor. This is the one that I designed for Hairbrained. It's my favorite. It's the Hairbrained Pro folding razor. But you know what I've learned over the years is a lot of people don't use this. And I want you guys to get the most lesson that you possibly can, not for me to just say, hey, look at me, I use a razor that nobody else uses. But in all honesty, I prefer this because it gives me more flexibility and control. But when it comes to teaching, which I do all the time, I was just in Florida for 2 days with my good friend Lupe Voss, teaching razor cutting. You know, I find that 9 out of 10 of the students show up and they don't have a folding razor, they don't use one for their state reasons or their fear or whatever. So I've decided to do a lot of teaching with both tools. When you come to a class with me, I literally use both. I show you how to do it with this razor and I show you how to do it with the other razor. Now, the razors are virtually the same. It's the control and the technique that's different. You know, the way I can hold this, for me, I feel like I've got more flexibility with a folding razor. And I've learned to be safe. I follow as many great habits and practices as I can when I use this razor. And I feel like I've really learned how to control it. But I chose today to work with another beautiful razor from Feather called the Styling Razor because it's what everybody uses. So I want to give you guys the best possible lesson. But I always do say, hey, if you end up really loving razor cutting and you find yourself doing it a lot, it's the same story for me. I did a little bit of razor cutting using this type of razor, and I was like, hey, I really love this, and I want to see what the next level of it is. And for me, it was using the folding razor.
Ike was wondering if you did start from the front.
I sure did. I started in here. I put in the line with some razor graduation, slight elevation. Then I came around into the back. Some people would think of this as like a round graduation because it started in the front and then worked around into the back. And it definitely has a roundness to it. But you can see I've stopped right above the round of the head here. And that's where I'm going to change the cutting technique almost completely. Elevating, trying to keep that weight behind the ear. Here in the center, looking for a good connection right off the plane of the head. Bias blade, getting a nice soft graduation or taper here. Blade on a diagonal. Now I should be able to see a nice graduation through here. This is usually a time where I might kind of play with the hands, look at the shape. So right now that graduation is pretty external. It sits from the base of the occipital bone down and below on both sides. I'll turn around so you guys can see.
Let me get in a little closer.
Graduation in the nape here, a line coming down through into the front. Now you can see what I've got left is really from the top of the occipital bone almost to the apex. Now I'm going to change that. Now I could continue in the same way, and I could probably just open the blade and use weight removal techniques, but I want to give this a little bit more of a sleek profile. So now through what's left here, I'm going to use more vertical sections, and they're going to pivot off this apex point right here.
See that again, just
Vertical sections, and they're going to pivot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the graduation from the underneath and I'm going to extend it upward. All right? So just kind of pushing the roof up a little bit higher. So I'm going to take my tripod, my universal tripod, lower a little bit. Still going to push the head away from me so that I don't remove too much weight. I'm going to come in here, do a little bit of checking on the angle that I've already created. I can segment this off so it stays neat. Come right off the plane of the head here. Do you have a good angle, Cal?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Now, I built it up horizontally to this point. Now I'm going to continue it through vertically with a bias blade, working from the underneath up. And I just find that that helps me, you know, make sure I don't flatten it out and take too much weight away. A little bit more. Blades on a diagonal to my fingers. A little bit higher. Now this side is the large side of the parting. So I'll have to go a little bit higher here because the head rounds away from me even a little bit more. So up. Fingers angled out. Blade on a diagonal. Stroke fairly deep. That's something else to think about, the size of your stroke. My strokes around the perimeter were a little bit smaller, where now they're a little bit deeper or more open. And I'm also going to do a little bit of weight removal up here as well. Graduated shape, longest part of the graduation, working down, shorter. I'm just taking a little bit of weight out above the round of the head. Okay, going to keep doing that now. So if you're wanting to see how it happens, I'm going to repeat it multiple times. Section pivots, and you can see the uncut hair. Let's keep this clean. Again, I like to keep my sections fine and clean and organized, even when especially when I'm razor cutting, to be honest with you, because I find like the shapes can get really messy. Come through, down, find the angle, the previous section, the section underneath. Blade is on a diagonal, and working from the underneath up. Nice and soft.
If I could get that from a different angle, that would be awesome.
Okay, let's try it this way. So guys, this is the back of the head. Sections are pivoting around. If it was my client in the chair, I'd be lowering it a little bit each time. I'm now coming higher, angling my fingers so it's still graduated, coming in with the blade on a diagonal, and kind of walking my way up through the top. Elevate. Fingers around, up through that last piece. I'm going to come back through and remove a little bit of weight off the top of the graduation using what I like to call slicing, just using the front corner, kind of like channeling with the razor.
Jahari just popped in and was wondering about body position. Are there any tips you would like to point out for this particular haircut?
Body positioning with the razor is almost exactly the same as it is with the scissor.
When you're working on this top part particularly?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm working with my knuckles down, fingertips up.
And where is her face?
Inside, her face is facing away from me.
Okay.
Yeah, her face is over here, guys.
Yep.
I'm building the graduation from the bottom up. The thumb is leading the way because I'm working from the front to the back. And then my elbows, as if I was cutting with a scissor, I would cut it this way. Cutting with the razor, I cut the same way. You know, I'm a scissor cutter. I started out the first 10 years of my career, I never even touched a razor. So there may be other ways to hold it, but when I started to work with razor cutting, I just interpreted it as a scissor cutter. And the thing that I really loved about it was the blade itself and what it could do to hair. So I didn't feel like much else had to change except the finished result on the ends of the hair. It's like writing with a pen or writing with a pencil. You don't change how you hold it or what you do. It's just the tool is different, so I get a different end result.
Our good buddy Jeremy Hickson just tuned in.
Hey Jeremy, how you doing?
He's got love for the jacket also.
Always
Happy New Year to you guys all.
So just kind of walking that graduation up the head. The head is curving. I keep elevating, extending, following it through. Blade is on a bias all the way through until I reach the parting. Then I come back through in the opposite. I look through the hair. This is nice because you can see on the blonde, anywhere where the hair looks solid, I can create a little bit of space, so you can see how that happens. Opening, see how that changed? Opening it up, creating space.
Rainbow is wondering about the head position. Is it straight?
The head is always, when I'm graduating...
When doing the top section,
yeah, I always
she
tilt the head
mentioned.
away from me when I'm graduating, especially on the top. Because the top is the easiest part to knock the corner off, and then when you're done, it won't look graduated.
So for the record, her head is tilted?
Yep, away from me. So let me get some of this hair out of the way so you guys can see. You can see the side. So look at where I'm standing. I'm here, and her head is tilted away from me this way. As I move around the head, I keep re-tilting the head away from me slightly. When I was on the side, it was this way. Yeah, let's put another clip in here. When I was on the side, it was this way. Come to the back, I put the head up, tilt it over and away from me. So the idea here is that distance helps me keep the weight in the graduation, which is important because I want this to look graduated when I'm done. And especially working with the razor, you can easily take away too much weight. Working all the way up, extending, then working in reverse from the top down with what I call slicing.
Is it possible?
Bars of weight.
Is it possible to over elevate at this point when you're
Completely.
And what happens when that?
You start to flatten out the shape. You know, a common mistake. I don't even know that it's a mistake. It's just a common thing that people might do is they might switch to overhand cutting and kind of round this more. Now you're going to go from graduation into round layers. It's a different haircut. It's not going to have the same weight, the same graduated look. It's not a bad haircut, so when I say mistake, it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just not going to have that weight, that contour to it by rounding it off. So the more that you elevate, the less length you're going to have towards the top. The less length you have towards the top, the less of this kind of graduated feeling that I really love, the weighted kind of feeling. Even though it's very textured and light, it's still going to have a weighted feeling. Keep that hair damp. So again, wherever I'm standing, I've moved around to a different position. I readjust the head down and away from me. Section curves. You can see how this comes all the way through. I'm at the back of the head now. It's coming all the way through into what I previously cut. I'll turn it around even. I think this might be the best angle. You should really see my hand when I pick this up. This is the graduation from the underneath that I cut in the beginning. Now starting to extend. And you can see the softness or the taper on the ends of the hair. That's what made me really fall in love with razor cutting. I can still use structure, precision, really apply thinking to what I'm doing, all the things that I love about great hair cutting, but I can do it in a organic, soft way. If you guys love razor cutting, let us know. We want to hear, or if you've got challenges, or maybe you don't love razor cutting, because I know a lot of people don't. That's cool too. Gotta love something. Again, we're here for Professionals Who Practice, which is number 17 in our series with our good friends at Pivot Point. They provide these incredible mannequins to our educators, and we've had quite a lot of different great educators over 2018, and we've got quite a bit more planned for 2019. I guess I'm the first one of 2019, so I'm lucky. I was inspired by my good friend Jay Mahmood to show you guys some graduation. This is probably my last section on what I like to call the heavy side, and this is all that's left to cut on the light side. Then there'll be some detail work. So let's talk through that one more time. Last section, just so you can see exactly where we are here. Started in the front, put in this baseline, created some graduation on it, put some graduation through the back using more horizontal rounded sections. Now I'm extending that using more vertical sections that kind of pivot around through the crown.
Linda's digging your teaching skills. She says you're excellent.
Thank you. I've had a lot of practice over the years, Linda, so thanks for mentioning.
And Sheila was wondering, start to finish, how long should this haircut take you?
I think that's a great question. And for me, I'm at a point in my career where I book an hour with my clients. But my answer is to everyone, it depends on where you are in terms of clientele, how much money you need to make, what you can charge, You know, this is not a 15-minute approach, although to be honest with you, if you get good with it, it doesn't have to take a very long time. I take an hour with my clients or my guests from start to finish, but I like to pay lots of attention to their needs. The haircut itself, probably going to take me 30 to 35 minutes of that time. But ultimately, you know, I'm not that guy who's like, you know, you have to take hours for it. It really depends. If you're someplace where you're not charging a lot of money for a haircut and you need to make a great living, well, then you better learn fast techniques. Or you better find some way to charge more money for a haircut, and that's easier said than done. So, different for everyone.
Jeremy's with us again, and he mentioned that his apprentice would like to start to learn the razor and to be more comfortable. What advice would you give if she's just out of school?
I would say start with a razor like this. That's what I started with when I first started razoring, a feather styling razor. Just to get comfortable and not hurt yourself. You know, I know most of you guys are used to me using an unguarded feather or Hairbrained Pro razor like this one here. Today I wanted to show that, you know, great razor cutting is about knowledge and technique, and you can apply it with different tools. I could use this, but if she's right out of school, I don't want her to cut herself and then be terrified of razor cutting for the rest of her life like so many hairdressers are. So maybe get the skill and the appreciation first with a razor like this. Then there's a couple things she can do. First thing I would recommend is go to hairbrainlive.me, which is our online. If you love these little Facebook sessions, you should check those out. We film them in a beautiful studio with multiple camera angles, great sound. And I've got one called Razorcraft, which is right now $59 for about 3 hours of technical education on razor cutting. And I would say it's all done on a mannequin, pivot point mannequins, the goal being that you could work alongside the video at home. So that's what I would say. And you know what? Supplement it by going into our Facebook page, Hairbrained's Facebook page, and check out all the great razor cuts that we have in our Facebook Live section.
Nick Zervos is giving you props.
Hey, Nick. Boom. I think that's what he says, right?
That's exactly it, Gerard. You got it.
Yeah, Nick. We were just in Florida. I think he lives in Fort Myers area, actually. Nick, we were just in Fort Myers. We were in St. Petersburg. I was teaching class there. And then we went to Fort Myers to visit my uncle. And I just thought, I'm pretty sure he lives in Fort Myers. Let us know, Nick, where you live.
And just for the record, this razor that you're using now, it is the feather styling razor.
It's the traditional, probably the most popular one out there, the feather styling razor. Take your feather blades. I'm just using the standard feather blade, not a texturizing blade or anything like that. And again, I've taught so many classes, as I said before, and I stand up and I use the folding razor, and so few people have used it. So one of the things for 2019 is to show how much great it's the razor that is great. You know, it's you and how you control it.
There's a few people here, Katie and Jahari, I believe. They want to do more. They have a couple clients that they do razor cuts on. Maybe what are some keywords in the consultation or something that you might say that would enable your use of a razor?
You know what? I never ask for permission with what tool I'm going to use. I describe it. I say it's going to be soft. It's going to have movement. It's going to be a beautiful shape. It's going to be lush, but it's going to have soft texture to the ends. I describe the end result, and then I choose the tool to use with. If I start cutting someone's hair with a razor, and they say, hey, is that a razor? I don't like razor cuts. I say, fine, no problem. And I switch to the scissor, and I give them the same effect with a scissor, because we can use pointing, slicing. Over time, as they get to know me and trust me, I'll bring it up again. You know, I'll pick up that razor and start cutting again. And you'd be surprised, once people trust you and know that you're a professional, all that fear goes away. I don't ever try to convince them or say, hey, you're going to love it. You know, I focus on the end result, and then I choose the tool. And can I tell you something in my experience? 999 people out of 1,000 don't ever say a word to me about the tool. As long as it doesn't hurt, it doesn't feel like it's pulling, and one of the keys to that is using a nice sharp blade, having good control, good technique. Most people don't even notice what you're using, especially if you're giving them great service, making them feel comfortable, giving them a great engaging conversation. That's been my experience. Tell me what your experience has been. If you've had a lot of challenges with razor cutting, let's hear what they are and why they happen.
Emily was mentioning that she prefers technical haircuts with a razor because it's easy to get, to chop it off.
Of course, but it's the same with a scissor.
Yep, that's what she was mentioning.
When people say, oh, don't cut my hair with a razor, I had a razor haircut, it was bad. I don't say anything, but what I think is, did you ever have a bad scissor haircut? Of course, but you didn't blame the scissor. So almost at my last section here, so you guys can start to see, let me take it off, give it an easy spin around, what's happening here. Graduation, extension, no weight line. Pretty much the last section here, I'm going to combine these two together from one side to the other, and then it'll be just a little bit of detailing work using point slicing and tipping. I don't want most mannequins, great mannequins, get a little thick in the crown, in the crown. So I don't want to take too thick of a section here. And you can see it. I'm going to actually pre-lighten it first. So I'm slicing through that hair because it's so thick, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. Nobody wants a thin mannequin to work with. This one's got tons of hair. But that makes it easier now for me to control and cut my angle through.
Diana was wondering, to switch to scissors, what scissors would you pick up if you were to cut this haircut with scissors?
Well, if you're talking about a brand, at Hairbrained, we've designed our own scissor. It's called the HB Pro 1. It's made in Japan. One of the versions is made by BMAC. And I will pick that scissor up soon because I always like to kind of dust and check the ends of all my razor cuts with the scissor. I know some people don't do that, and it's a personal choice. But for me, it gives me confidence to make sure that the ends aren't overly thin or I didn't miss anything. So I will be picking up the scissors shortly. You'll notice now that I'm coming back through from about mid-occipital doing what we call tipping. And this is just checking and filtering the graduation, making sure there isn't too much of a heavy corner here. I come in, come right off the plane of the head, right where the two sides meet. And it's a little bit cornery. So just coming in here and rounding by using the tip of the blade, and here coming in using the heel of the blade, making sure that this is rounded through. Even though it's got a beautiful texture, and it does, I'm happy with that. Come through. Again, as I get into the very top, this is where the hair tends to get thicker. I'll use two techniques, slicing to separate the hair.
Would you say at this point you would be like cross-checking this haircut?
I'd call it refining and cross-checking, sure. Refining and cross-checking.
Johari says the same thing, basically the same time you were mentioning about using the scissor. Says he feels like he always kind of needs to finish the razor haircut with scissor. And
I will do that, and you guys, it'll look like an air cut if I've done a good job. But it does, I call it sealing the ends. The blade, I also find the guarded blade, the one that I'm using, can leave the ends a little bit more open. The unguarded blade being so sharp, I find it closes the ends a little bit nicer for me. But when I use the guarded blade like this, I definitely do a little bit of checking with the scissor on the ends of the hair. I'm actually going to work what I'm doing right now, this cross check, all the way up over the top of the head, over directing back. So across the parting, elevating a little bit, and for the first time here you're going to see me, maybe not quite yet, but you're going to see me start to cut overhand. Everything I've done so far has been inside the hand. And what this is doing is the two kind of apexes of graduation from both sides. It's just putting a little bit of softness in there and making sure the corner isn't too heavy, so we have versatility.
In terms of styling?
In terms of styling and swing, and if the wind blows, I don't want a random piece falling from one side to the other. Okay, now this is what I was just talking about. For the first time in this haircut, you're going to see me cut over the fingers with elevation, and you're going to see me kind of come in. Now, you can only do this with a guarded razor. I'm going to come in and just check some of these ends. I'll also check later with the scissor, but I do it first with the razor. Why not? It's in my hand. Now creating a little separation.
Maha was wondering, if you use a scissor, would you be primarily point cutting?
Yeah, pointing, slicing, yes. I very rarely, and that's just me over the years, I very rarely cut what's called club cutting or blunt cutting. I just like that textured feel on the ends of the hair. I have, since the early 90s, just always preferred that. So I think at a certain point, it's about self-awareness and knowing what you like, and building a clientele that likes what you like obviously helps a lot, because then you can kind of work together to give them the things that they need, and you can have a great time. Okay, I'll do a little switching to the scissor here, as I mentioned earlier. You'll see me check through the top here. And again, air cutting just with the tip. So for those who asked about the scissor, this is the HB Pro 1, something I designed a few years ago with, went to Japan, worked with this is a Japanese-made scissor, made in Japan, 100% Japanese. Our friends at BMAC made this one. And here I'm doing what I call sealing the end. So you can see that, but you can see there's a shape there. Again, I think sometimes people are like, oh, razor cutting is just about texturizing. And it very well could be for some people, but not necessarily for me. And maybe if you like this technique as well, you'll feel the same way.
Now, can you tell us about the sections you're taking? Are they mimicking?
Just vertical, pivoting from the front hairline. I pretty much bring everything straight out on base, and I just kind of filter through. So nothing really should be coming off except just the very, very micro bit at the ends. So over the years, what I've done is, after the razor cut is done, I just bring everything straight out from where it was cut and check it. And this does make a nice difference, especially for me when I work with a guarded blade. Because the guarded blade, to me, leaves the ends even a little bit more raw. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like, after you've done a beautiful color, putting your zero gloss over it just seals it all away.
Did you just pick that up from Lupe in the classes?
Absolutely. It's a preservation gloss.
A preservation gloss.
Preservation gloss.
She'll be happy to know you took that in. Crystal McKnight appreciates this. She's learning a lot. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Pleasure to have you here this afternoon.
Great. Thanks, and thanks to our sponsors, Pivot Point, providing these great learning tools for our classes.
Now, in terms of styling, I know that you like to air dry. What are some other ways to finish this?
You can finish it any way that you want. You could use a round brush. I'm not partial to a round brush on shorter hair, just because personally I think it looks a bit old, like matronly. But if I did want to use a brush, I would use a Denman brush or any type of 9-row brush or a Mason Pearson brush, and I would do some wrap drying, and I would just smooth the hair out. I'm not going to do that today because first of all, it's not my favorite, and second of all, it just gets a little bit, I think, tedious on a video here. I want to show you the beautiful cutting technique. I will put some product in here and let it air dry so you can see what it's going to look like, but I think you can see.
And Jay was wondering, can you explain what you were talking about, the way that the razor leaves the ends with the guarded versus a straight razor?
Yeah, I just find for me the straight razor has no guard. So the thing with a guarded blade, it's got these little bumpers. So every once in a while it hits the blade, sometimes it hits the bumper, sometimes it hits the blade, and for me it can be a little more inconsistent. When I use an unguarded blade, which I generally use, is pure consistency, everything has got the same kind of quality to it. So for me, and again, the one thing I've learned over the years is we're all different. So that's just, I just know myself, my technique, the way I want it to look. I'm happy to share that with you guys, and hopefully you find it beneficial, but it's not the law. So I tend to find I need to do a little more checking when I use the guarded blade. Just dusting, looking for any inconsistencies and sealing the ends. Turn it around a little bit so you guys get a little more camera action. You can see what I mean. Sometimes I call it air cutting because really what's coming off is dust if you look on the scissor. But with hair cutting, the difference between good and great is dust. I do find this will make it last a little bit longer, style a little bit better, all of those things. I do want to check the balance a little bit at the front with the scissor.
Is it because you have such a heavy side and a dominant heavy side?
Yeah, she's got a low side parting, and I chose to cut it with the low side parting. So you have to kind of swing. You'll see I'll bring this all the way over. Sometimes you can even put a clip here. And really what I need to work on here is making sure that these are balanced when it's clipped. And they're almost there. A little bit of checking, but I'm looking at these two front pieces here and making sure that they fall the same way. This is obviously going to fall longer when it falls in front of her face because it's got a further distance to travel, but she's going to wear it over here. So it's got to be even when it comes to the sides. So it's one of those things in hair cutting where you cut technically asymmetrical, but visually get a balance. Now I can also elevate this and check off a tiny little bit of that weight. Hair's almost dry now, and rather than redampening it, I'm just going to continue doing any little final work with the skizzer, or the shear, or the scissor, or whatever you want to call it. The shearzer. So all about elevating, checking. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of product in. First I'm going to use a little bit of a styling spray at the root, just to give, especially in these crown layers, give a little bit of oomph in the crown, just right at the root. And then through the middles and the ends, I'm going to use a little bit of a curl cream. One of my favorite combinations is, some type of a spray, a thickening spray, nothing too gritty. I like kind of a clean spray. In this case, that's what I got into the root there, and now using a little bit more of a curl cream or a styling cream on the ends. My favorite combination. Lots of different product lines will work exactly for that.
Susan Jacobs is into it. Great tutorial. She loves razor haircut. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Hope you picked up some good tips.
Absolutely. Going ahead, I'm going to add a little bit more curl cream.
Shauna nailed it. Mentions it's very high fashion. Jahari Coop, of course, says thanks to all of us. Thanks to you guys for tuning in and sharing hair with us.
Yeah, thanks guys. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity. I'm so grateful that my career has turned out the way that it has, and I get the opportunity to share not only my own education, but the education of hundreds, if not thousands, of other great educators. If you're new to Hairbrained, we do these classes multiple times a week here on Facebook Live with lots of different educators, either from brands or completely independent. And we also have what's called the Hairbrained Live Academy, which is at hblive.me. And if you've never checked that out, it's taking what we do here to a whole other level of production. So please go out to check hblive.me. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to let this dry off naturally. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll give her a good little twist around as we finish up here, and you can see the idea. Textured, graduation, working from a heavier front. I worked in reverse, kind of like that feeling. And I hope you enjoyed that, guys, and it's been a pleasure spending time with you. Thanks, Kelly, for working behind the camera, and peace out.